Hi everybody in Abnormal Psychology, Psych 266. This week's topic is mood disorders. It's a long chapter as far as the number of pages go, but I'm going to let you know exactly what you should be aware of to do well on this next exam. So, the chapter actually starts, where does it start? On page 108. But our discussion will start on page 113. I should perhaps back up a little bit and explain that there's really only two directions your mood can go, up and down, and both of those can be problematic. It's better in a lot of ways if your mood remains basically constant. Of course you want to be happy most of the time, and people have good days and bad days. However, we're going to talk about the extremes of mood that are maladaptive and cause problems. So let's get started. Page 113, Major Depressive Episode. We do not diagnose people with this condition unless it's been happening for 2 weeks straight. That way you're not just having a bad day, a bad afternoon, or even a bad week. 2 weeks straight, you're having a depressive episode. What is going on? Well, the person is typically very sad and upset constantly, changes to eating and sleeping patterns, negative thoughts. Physically, you feel tired and worn out, known as psychomotor retardation. It's not surprising when a person either feels hopeless or suicidal or both, worthless, lack of self-esteem. Their thoughts feel slow as well as their physical movements. Not fun to be in that state of mind. The one symptom, though, that I want you to know is a Greek term, anhedonia, lack of enthusiasm or lack of hedonism. I guess it directly translates to nothing seems like fun anymore. That is the number one symptom that you're depressed, that nothing seems fun. So, moving right along, that's a major depressive episode. A manic episode, instead of the mood being down, the mood would be up. That sounds like fun, doesn't it? Well, maybe for an hour or two, but you don't want to be like that for days on end because eventually you get angry and agitated. It's not fun after a short period of time. In order to have a manic episode diagnosed, it has to go on for a week straight, 7 days. What will you see? The person using very poor judgment, making bad decisions, things that could be even dangerous and or illegal, not sleeping well. You do have to sleep a little, by the way. It's a myth that you can not sleep for days at a time. You probably sleep for minutes at a time and not even realize it. So a lack of sleep, hyperactivity, thoughts racing through your head, poor judgment, like I said, these are all symptoms of somebody having a manic episode. Rapid speech, because thoughts are flying through your head, that only makes sense, doesn't it? So, what do we call it when people have alternating episodes of weeks of depression and then at least a week or more of mania? You guessed it, bipolar disorder. If you've ever heard it called manic depressive disorder, same thing. So, moving right along. A manic episode can be truly manic, and that is very maladaptive. It's hard to function when you're that way, but it can also be what's called hypomanic. You just have a little more energy than you're used to, you're getting a little less sleep than you're used to, so hypo means less than, slightly less than a true manic episode. Hypomanic, it's less severe. Still uncomfortable, still unpleasant, and still maladaptive, but less severe in nature. Now, page 122, major depressive episodes. These can go on for months. Manic episodes, not so much, but we'll get to that. Depressive episodes can go on for many months. In fact, on average, 6 to 9 months. That's the top of page 123. But let me back up a little. The bottom of page 122 About 7% of the population experiences a true depressive episode, and it's about 2 to 1 female. Now, why is that? If we were in class together, I'd ask people to raise their hands and share their thoughts and opinions. Is it because women have more hormonal issues during a month and during a lifetime even? Is it childbirth? Is it what we call multiple role theory, that you're supposed to be good at all these things at once? You know, you're judged on your appearance and your job and whether you're a good mom and a good daughter and all those things that men don't seem to worry about as much. There's not as much society pressure. Could it be completely, sexism, that we judge women for being more emotional than men? Perhaps women admit it more than men, that they're feeling depressed. Or, seems like every semester in my live in-person classes, somebody raises her hand and jokes, maybe it's the guys that are making us depressed. Maybe. Can't argue with that one. For whatever reason, depressive episodes are diagnosed in women far more than men. Not just women, teenagers too, females, and even some children. Moving right along, we're going to skip to page 129 in the book, Bipolar 1 Disorder. Roman numeral 1, like a capital letter I, that is how you write it out. What does that mean? You are having depressive episodes and true manic episodes. Whereas bipolar 2, you're having depressive episodes followed by hypomanic, not as severe manic episodes. In bipolar 1 disorder, we see this pretty much equally distributed between men and women. Pretty equal. Also, people can get psychotic. You can get so manic, especially, but even depressed, that you become out of touch with reality. It's not schizophrenia like the previous chapter, because those people are out of touch with reality nearly all the time. But if you only get that way when your moods are extreme, we would call that bipolar 1 with psychotic features. So, men and women equally affected. It has to be mood cycles, not just that you get in a bad mood. Seems like in class, there's always someone who will say something like, I live at home with my parents and I can come home and my mom will say, "How was your day, honey? Why do you leave your crap on my floor?" So my mom's bipolar. And I'm like, no, you're a slob. That's the diagnosis. I'm joking, of course. Just because mom gets mad that you leave your junk all around does not mean she's bipolar. Maybe she is, I don't know. But that kind of story comes up in class a lot. That is not the definition of bipolar. We're talking about cycles that are uncontrollable, that last at least weeks at a time, if not months. So, bipolar disorder, 90% of the time it will come back if a person has a full cycle. That's the bad news. But the good news is at least you know what to do about it. You need help, you need medicine, you need a change of lifestyle. Things like that come up where people at least know how to handle it, even though it does seem to reoccur. It goes in a cycle. Now, moving right along, we talked about bipolar 2. On page 135, it goes into a little bit more detail. This is slightly less severe on the manic end because it is hypomanic, slightly less than manic, rather than a true manic episode. If you're following in the book, which is a good idea, page 138. Persistent depressive disorder used to be called dysthymia. And you know what? It's still called dysthymia. It now has 2 names. What does this mean? You are slightly less than depressed. Hypodepressed, as we could say, to fit in with the hypomanic terminology. But you know what? It lasts much longer. So would you rather have a bad depressive episode of several months and get over it? Or have like a low-grade depression and have it go on for maybe even years? So I don't know which one is worse. Maybe they're both bad in different sorts of ways, but that is dysthymia. A lower grade depression, not as severe, but much longer lasting. By the way, in case you're curious, medicines like Prozac, they tend to work better on people who are more depressed rather than dysthymic. That's good news for people who are depressed and seeking help. Page 146 is where we will move on to, for the purpose of knowing what's going to be on the test. Premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Can I be honest with you? Especially as a guy, there is no nice way to talk about PMS without sounding judgmental. It's true. Even for years, they hesitated putting it in the DSM because it just sounds so judgmental. It's basically men judging women, don't you think? Most of the men write these things. Most of the time it's men, and it's women suffering from it. Well, why do they call it premenstrual dysphoric disorder? This is one of the few disorders where you can diagnose yourself. Is your PMS so bad that it really is maladaptive and interferes with your life? We would then say that you have premenstrual dysphoric disorder. It's debilitating, mentally, physically, or both. It is estimated that about 20% of women who are at the age where they can have a period, usually 12 years old to mid-40s, would suffer from symptoms of this, but 7% of women have it so bad that it really is debilitating and incapacitating and truly interferes with their life. Next one, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. I am going to post a video that's disturbing to watch, but it's of an adolescent boy, I don't know, maybe 10 to 12 years old. It's hard for me to know for sure. But what we're talking about here is children that have a meltdown on a regular basis. They're typically depressed and unhappy, but when they get mad, look out. People are going to get hurt, stuff's going to get broken, and if it's not quite that bad, they will just have a meltdown in their room or right there in the store and embarrass everybody that's with them. So, out of control anger when there is no reason to be that angry. Remember in the neurodevelopmental chapter, we talked about how age is an important factor? Well, this is a childhood disorder. We don't diagnose this in adults. In adults, we call it something else. But in children, the definition of this includes that you are too old to be acting this way. You are too old. This isn't terrible twos. We're talking about 8, 10, 12-year-olds, teenagers. You are way too old to be having meltdowns like that. By the time you get to be an adolescent, you should have your emotions under better control than kids do who have this condition. If you're following in the book, there's lots of stories that follow, which is a good thing, but for the purpose of the test, we're going to skip to page 162 and 163. Essential features or mixed features of different types of depression. So, depression with peripartum onset. We used to call this slightly different terms, that it was related to whether you were just about to give birth or you just gave birth. Now it means peripartum, surrounding the birth of your baby. It could start right before or right after, but that is the kind of depression that we're talking about. So, it's common for women who have babies to go through this. They just maybe don't speak up and tell anyone because it's the time of life that everybody says, oh, you must be so happy. You should be so happy you just had a baby. It doesn't always feel that way because the hormones are playing tricks on your emotions and your emotions might be out of control. So, peripartum depression, immediately before or after childbirth. And then the next thing, seasonal pattern. This also has another name, and this is the last thing that we'll talk about on this recording. Seasonal affective disorder is the other name. What is this? You get depressed when the days are shorter and the weather is colder, maybe rainy, maybe snow. Basically, where does this happen? I've got a clue for you. Not usually in the Phoenix area. Have you ever lived anywhere else that has cold, dreary winters, rainy or snowy, or maybe very short days if you lived up north? When I talk about this in my in-person classes, a lot of people have good stories, and some of them are even brave enough to admit that they felt this, and maybe they didn't even know that it had a name. Now, I'm going to give you a free answer to a test question right now. Of all the major cities in the United States, populations of 500,000 people or more, what city has more of this than any other that's diagnosed? Seattle. Does that surprise you? Seattle's not known for their brutally cold winters, but it sure does rain a lot, especially in the winter, and it's up in the northern part of the United States, so therefore the days are shorter. And in Canada, right above Seattle, if you look on a map, they get it even more than people in Seattle do. Just so you know, that will be a test question. So that's a depressive episode, but a seasonal pattern, whereas the peripartum type is not seasons of the year, but based on having a child, having a baby, giving birth. So that is what I want you to know for this chapter. We've done 3 chapters of the book so far, and you should now be prepared for the next exam. Take care.